Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, May 15th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. There's a lot about the current pattern we're in right now that has really got me thinking about this long-range forecast. So I'm going to show you what I think is going to happen here in the near term. And at the end of this video, we're going to recap how I think the evolution of things we're seeing right now in May could be critical to understanding what maybe June, July, and August may favor. In other words, we won't see it every day, but we may favor. So the pieces are this cutoff low that's sitting here between Hawaii and British Columbia, or Hawaii and Alaska. And the larger ridge that's over the west, we've been talking about this developing, and this is what's bringing on quite a bit of heat. Underneath it, though, you can see flow coming through the Intermountain West, and this is ignited thunderstorms throughout this area. And there's still a subtropical component to this jet that I think is going to have to keep a very close eye on. But we notice that here the flow is coming out of the northwest through the Canadian Prairie, and it's through parts of the Great Lakes and east. And we see here, sitting over the southeast, a ridge. And this ridge is quite important in the near term. Now, the features that I'm thinking about longer term, all right, is the position of this trough and where this northwest flow is going to go. So all these other little sub-features, that's more about the near-term weather. But what's really good about the flow around this high-pressure cell right now is that it's delivering moisture to one of the places that was missed in the last 7 days. And this is what I'm talking about. This animation just shows you from this morning through the middle of the day where we've seen kind of the radar echoes indicating where there's some precip. And what I'm watching most carefully is coming out of Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri. And remember, Missouri was one of the states where some of the precipitation from last week's very heavy rainfall missed, especially northern Missouri. Same thing for this part of Kansas and pockets of Oklahoma. And so we're just watching this today just as an indicator of what it takes to deliver some moisture into this area. Because after we get through the rest of today, I think we're going to see a drier signal for a large part of the Midwest. One feature that we will likely see a lot of in the coming days and possibly weeks is at the end of this animation, watch the whole of the western mountains pop with echoes. That is just heat of the day, tossing convection up into the atmosphere, and we're popping storms here. Now, just to compare what you just saw to where we've been, this is our last 7 days. So from last Monday to this Monday, and we're looking here at total accumulated precipitation. So you notice, I know when you stare at a map like this, my color bar is just such that it looks as though there was rain everywhere. But remember, you've got to get up into these shades before we see what I would call significant rain. So we can identify there's a corridor in through here that was drier, parts of the eastern Cornbelt that was drier, pockets in North Dakota, northern Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, that have been up drier. And then, of course, New England, pockets throughout the southeast getting into the Carolinas. And then throughout the west, we've just seen limited precipitation, although some of the rains that have come in here to Montana have added to already very wet conditions. So I want to make sure that we're seeing all of this in context when we talk about who's recently had the rain and who's not. And of course, some of the just absolutely stunning views of some of the storms we saw this weekend coming out of Colorado into Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa were just spectacular, but did some damage with those storms as well. Okay, next, let's go to some satellite imagery. A couple of things I want to point out here as we get some new imagery in this afternoon. A lot of this is smoke from the wildfires that are over British Columbia, and it's interesting to see how much cloud cover is right now stretched from parts of the midsection of the country over toward Virginia and North Carolina. We do see that throughout the day today, some of the storms are popping around the periphery of that high pressure cell sitting here. So a lot of disorganized convection in this area, and storms coming up into parts of Texas, which remember, we're still going to see at the beginning of this week more rainfall getting added to what has already been a very wet week, last 7 days at least in parts of Texas. Now, where you saw that cloud cover, it's interesting to note that over the last 30 days, those two regions have actually not been very cloudy. This shows you cumulative downward solar flux, and so it's very important this time of year to see how much sun is getting down to the surface as the crop is emerging in certain places like here in the Midwest, that we need that sunshine to really get the crop just to pop out of the ground. Note how we've been in a major deficit, in this region with seeing a lot of sunlight, and same thing for parts of eastern Texas into Louisiana. So I just like to keep a close eye on this, especially as we move toward the full vegetative stages of the crops throughout a big section of the country here. I know we're already there down south, but just moving in the midsection of the country toward that time period, especially as we get closer to the solstice, just knowing how much sunlight's actually getting down to the canopy. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is if we just take a look at the NDVI imagery, because we do have some new data in, I want to pick apart the country. I'm not gonna look at the west right now. I'm gonna look the eastern half of the country. Let's start with the upper Midwest and northern plains. I'm just gonna pick Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Minnesota. And it's important to note that right now the NDVI values in early May are below the historical averages. Okay, so they're down here. They're less than they were a year ago as well. Now, if we click off of those and go a little bit farther south, how about Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri? Let's pick Kansas and Oklahoma as well and take Wisconsin off of there. In fact, I'm going to go grab Ohio as well. Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Let's get this whole big area in through here. We once again see the NDVI values are lower than average. And then I'm going to click off of these real quick because I want to give you one last view of this. Sorry, this website's a great website, but it does require some navigation and some clicking around to get this all to work. And I'm probably doing it too fast. Here we go. Let's grab from North Carolina and just grab this part of this is almost a lot of the cotton belt down here. There we go. Come on. Texas. And that area, if you notice, the NDVI values are up. They're above the historical averages. So a great website here just to kind of play around and look at this. But I'm just thinking that's a big section of the country, this whole area, that has been below normal on the NDVI values. And I encourage you to go look at it. Look at the Northeast and look at the West. I'll link it actually in the notes down below so you have access to this. But what I was thinking about was what happened in the month of April. And it's interesting, if you kind of take a look at the statewide average temperature ranks for April, we know we had a lot of snow up here in the upper Midwest. We know we had cold conditions. But I'm looking at this going, well, my home state of Illinois or Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, this has been quite warm when you look at the whole statistics. But I don't know, I'll take you over to Indiana. Let's go to, how about Kokomo? Why not? Kokomo, Indiana. And if we just take a look, this might tell the story as to why, even though we saw such a mild monthly stat, we did not have the emergence of the crop as fast as we want. And that's because if you look at the year-to-date temperatures, yeah, that's what I was expecting. In April, early April, a lot of warmth. From about April 15th on, a lot of colder weather. Now we've warmed up again at the beginning of May. So to see this overall pattern, it was quite warm, then cold again, and then backing up again to warm. We kind of just keep spending half the month one way, another half of the month another way. And I don't think that pattern is going to slow down. Because what have the last 7 days done? There's been a lot of heat into this area while the west was colder. But then what happened this weekend? All the heat moved back into the west, into the Canadian Prairie, and that's what's really just cranked up those temperatures in that part of the country. And over the next 10 days, the 12Z European model says keep the heat where the ridges are going to be in the western United States. So now I just wonder how much of May is going to keep the flow doing something like this. This is what we've got in the jet stream. It's splitting over the west. There's ridges here. There's little weak short waves underneath it, but that seems to be the setup. It appears as though we're going to be dealing with this from now through the next probably 10 plus days overall. Now, thinking about that and all that heat that's going back into the Canadian Prairie and back to British Columbia, I just want to remind you, if you just take a look at this satellite imagery from today, just sun up to late this afternoon, all of this is wildfire smoke from just what's been almost persistent wildfires coming out of Alberta and parts of northern Saskatchewan. And some of this is over into British Columbia as well. But just taking a look at where all that smoke is going, I guess this is the first time this year I've shown you these. Normally we're looking at them in August, September, October. But here we are watching that wildfire smoke getting spread farther and farther to the east. And what it's going to actually indicate for us, see how it kind of dips at the very end there? That's actually the position of some drier air with a frontal boundary that's going to be sagging into the midsection of the country coming forward. More on that in a second. Okay, I'm kind of speeding through this just because I'm trying to stitch these ideas together in my mind. And what I want to do is let's kind of get a whole picture here, and then we'll move into this forecast. The North American Drought Monitor is only released once a month, all right? And so this is the one that was released on April 30th. We won't get another one until the end of May. But we do note that there's currently just some ongoing drought issues in parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan and parts of Manitoba. And then we can see down here in the central United States where our drought issues are. Now, if you remember a few moments ago, I said that over the next 7 days, we're seeing this pattern, or at least 10 days, trying to do something like this. And what that split flow is going to do is set us up with a precipitation pattern that looks something like this. So remember, I'm sorry I keep going over this, but it's critical to this pattern. Whenever you have northwest flow coming through the midsection of the country, this time of year, it's convergent in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And what that means is there's mass buildup. In other words, the air is forced to gather when it comes over a ridge and into a trough. And whenever you have mass convergence here, the air has one way to go. If you're talking about the jet stream, and the only way it can go is down. It cannot go up. The stratosphere is there. The stratosphere is statically stable and stratified. You can't push air from the troposphere into it and just displace it permanently. So the air goes down. And descending air compressionally warms and dries. And as a result, we just tend to suppress convection. We tend to suppress the return of Gulf moisture. So the flow is doing this. But on the underneath side, we got these little weak waves that keep coming around here. And it's given us this kind of sense of like a false southwestern monsoon, but it's not. This isn't driven by heat. This is just driven by the subtropical jet. So it looks like our next pattern that we're going to be in for maybe 10 plus days looks something a bit more like this. And I'm going to need you to stuff this in the back of your head, because every new long-range weather forecast that was just released that's going to tell you what June's going to look like or even beyond, it was all just initialized with flow coming like this right across the heart of the country. And what that typically does is bias the longer range forecast to be persistent with this. So we're wetter here, we're wetter along the Gulf Coast, up the East Coast to the Carolinas and Virginia. All right. Thinking about that, that means that the area that we've seen this improvement on from early May to mid-May in soil moisture, we're now going to watch this area not see as much precipitation. So we'll have to keep an eye on these soil moisture values to see if they start to expand. Now, a little bit of dryness in May and June is not bad on the crops that's grown here, as long as we hit it hard with moisture once we get into late June and July and August. In fact, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that slight drought stress on the crops, the big ones grown right here in the midsection of the country, actually help the crop develop a different style of root system, one where it's more capable of drawing on moisture farther into the ground and also wider, farther away from the root ball. So we have to just know that there are still some stressed areas, but we shouldn't be interpreting this as a negative signal overall. Because over the last 14 days, again, I showed this morning, but I want to highlight, your eye can drift to your local area here and see that whether or not you were in the haves or the have-nots for the last 14 days. My eye often just tries to find those areas that have missed out on precip. And if we're going to see the pattern, fill those areas in. So we're just kind of seeing where the stress potential could be highest going forward. So again, all of this is going to be about the upper level height pattern. And I will tell you, the global teleconnections, like the MJO or like any sort of northern hemisphere blocking or the behavior of the North Pacific or North Atlantic, I got to be honest, the pattern, the teleconnections are not strong. They're not what I would want to be able to see to be more conclusive. So let's just see where it's going to take us. Through this week, a couple of things I'll be watching. Deeper trough later in the week here into New England. This is going to prompt on Thursday morning the risk of some interior frost in New England. There is a short wave that made its way over this big ridge that's going to reinvigorate around this broader trough and bring in some high pressure behind it for late in the week. And that trough, see it digging in right here? This is by Friday. And as it sweeps through, it's got a cold front behind it. And that's going to bring in some chilly air, some temperatures in the 30s here in this section of the country. But I just played you through the next 5 days, and we just keep seeing this pattern. Do you see it there? So let's go out through the weekend and into early next week. And what I'll be watching for by the time we get to the 23rd, 24th, 25th is something to shift around a bit. Now, you know that right now we have a big ridge here, but we see some trough redevelopment right here on this part of the Aleutian Islands closer to the mainland of Alaska. And the flow is wanting to do something like this in the ensembles. See it? Now that could mean that once we get past the 24th, we get southwest flow in the jet stream. Now, did you see what I'm doing here? Follow the contours. We have geostrophic wind at this height, which means the flow follows the contours. That's where it's going to be about 9-10 days from now. Where is it in the near term? It's doing this. See the difference? We're getting flow out of the northwest versus flow back out of the southwest. And in a nutshell, if you live in the middle part of this country, you want southwest flow in spring. You want northwest flow in summer, southwest flow in spring. That's it. So to take a look at how this all shakes down, let's go back to the moisture side of this. Here we are just playing through. Let's get the newest update. There it is. As we just play through today, you're going to see this dry air begin to squash through this side of Canada and the Great Lakes. And as it does that, it's going to push down farther here. This is by Wednesday, drying this particular region out. So we're pushing the moisture farther to the south. Here's the little system that rides over the ridge, and it's got a little bit of moisture to work with, bringing in some showers into this area Wednesday into Thursday, but not much. It's disconnected from the full pull of the moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico. So that comes through, and then there's more drier air behind it by Thursday and Friday swiping through. We just kind of squash that moisture all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Much different than what I talked about for the last 8 days, where it was just abundant, open moisture transport of the Gulf of Mexico. That's what we did. So here's the difference. So what does it give us? Well, right now, looking at our all hazards weather map as of 4:20 in the afternoon on Monday, we do have a few places we're watching for flooding. So here and here. All of the polygons that you see drawn in these areas, these are all flood watches or local flooding. You come over to the west, this is all flood, snowmelt issues here. We talked about that last week. Heat advisories in the Puget Sound, heat advisories in the San Joaquin Valley. So we're just keeping an eye here on what this pattern's doing. The heat is west, the cooler weather is east. All right, severe weather. Today, we're going to keep an eye in the Mid-South. Tomorrow, this is going to move a bit farther to the east over parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And to show you how that all looks, let's go to the latest update from the NAM model. And let's just pick this up this evening. So this is this evening, still watching the precip moving through Missouri. We notice that all the scattered convection's out here in the west. But you'll see that all that go away overnight. That's all heat driven. And I'm hoping, just hoping this all hangs on like the models are suggesting with this light scattered rain through tonight. Now that moves into southern Illinois, central Illinois tomorrow morning, over into Indiana, parts of Kentucky. And as you know, we're going to watch right here tomorrow night for the risk of some strong storms. I think straight line wind damage, possibly some small hail. And just given the history of this system, maybe the risk of some tornadoes in there as well. Scattered convection to the south. And as you notice again, middle of the day on Tuesday, let me rephrase that, evening on Tuesday, storms popping in the mountains in the west. So playing out toward Wednesday, that's when the little clipper tries to go over the top of that ridge, and there's its front. So this is midday Wednesday, getting into a Wednesday night, and that's where that front's going to be. Okay, from there, why don't we just get up to the longer range models. I do want to point out again that our models, after reaching this nice little peak over the weekend, the beginning of the week, they've kind of tanked off a little bit in their accuracy, but we're going to compare them both anyway. So the 12Z GFS on the left, 12Z European on the right. We have already played through Tuesday out into Wednesday. And as we get out here into Thursday, can you see the high pressures here ahead of this with the low that's curling through Manitoba? That's that next system. So this lingering front from the first system down here over the southeast, the next one coming through. So that low presses over the Great Lakes by Friday. Large area of high pressure behind it, bringing in some cooler weather. But both models, good position on the front, better storms, parts of the plains. I like to see that by Friday. Now, another feature in this is as this low moves through the Great Lakes, there is a coastal low that's showing up with the European model, that's the one over here, bringing more of that rain to coastal North and South Carolina. This is Friday morning, Friday afternoon, and evening. So what we're watching here is one large front sweep through. See it there? Of course, the GFS is more progressive than the European. That's a common theme. And there's high pressure and some cooler weather coming in behind this to start off our weekend. So that system rolls through, some cooler weather, and just notice the European model is quite different in the position of this low. Watch it right here. Pulls it straight up the East Coast, delivering some rain along the East Coast. The GFS hangs it out to dry here out of the open Atlantic. So just some differences there. But that gets us through this Saturday, playing into the weekend. High pressure's in control. There's a little bit of a chance for some lighter precip here, and we're going to watch this pattern evolve going into week 2. So here it is. I think this map captures what's going to happen a lot over the next 10 days. I've been showing you maps that look at the probability of getting at least an inch of total accumulated precip. Now we're on that week off, or that 10-day off time frame. So what you see here is the probability of getting less than a half inch. So we do notice there's that corridor in the northwest flow that's drier. I do want to show you who's going to get the rain, though. So here's the probability of an inch over the next 10 days. We're just kind of honing in on those wet versus those dry areas. What about week 2? Well, you saw in the forecast, let me go back to it, not that one, this one. You saw that once we get out here past the 26th, we start to get flow like this again. And I said that's going to open the Gulf and start to give us chances for storms. Well, the models are suggesting that, that day 8 through 15 time period, can you see it? See the green starting to show up here. So that drier weather is moving out, and we're going to see behind it better chances for storms. Now, this whole time period, we have this section of the country still favoring near normal to above normal precipitation. So we'll watch that as well. Okay, temperature discussion, then long range. I apologize. First, I did want to show you that there is some agreement between the 12Z Euro for week 2 and the 12Z GFS for week 2. Now let's talk about temperatures. I showed this map this morning, and I just said we do have the frost potential. That was this morning here in lower Michigan, and we have the frost potential later this week in New England. But we did mention that this is an area that can still get frost this time of year, and I wanted to show you that. So I'm just going to go over to my site. I'd already typed it in. Hazen, I think is how you say it, or Hazen. I'm sorry, I've never been there, so I need to know. But North Dakota, so we're going to click on it. And I just want to point out here, one of the tools we've got on the site is that if you come over here and slide down to the bottom and click on year-to-date GDDs, these blue bars represent historical frost dates. So you notice that here we are, it's quite common to have frosts well toward the end of May in this part of the country. Now, I don't think we're going to see one. I think we're going to see temperatures in the 30s, but not a frost. By the way, Hazen is well behind the 20-year average on the accumulation of GDDs because how cool the spring has been. But let's go have a look at it. So here are the operational European model temperatures. And I'm playing through the rest of Monday into Tuesday. And what we're watching out for are these colors or this hard contour. So that's Wednesday morning, frost in the interior of New England, and of course in Quebec and Ontario. Got those backwards, Ontario and Quebec. And then playing out there to Thursday morning, okay, and then toward Friday. So you see this? This is the temperature pattern wrapped around that low I mentioned. And behind it with high pressure, there's Friday morning. And you just notice we see a lot of these colors representing temperatures that are down there in the, in the mid upper 30s. The European model right now is not calling for a frost event. It's just not seeing it. But we just need to be aware that those overnight lows are going to be chilly on Friday morning in this area. Now that front sweeps through and clears things out, and that's why we see most of our heat west where the ridge is, but these GDD numbers are not nearly as high as they have been in the last week or so. Where they're quite low is here in New England, which kind of hangs on to this cooler bias going forward. Okay, speaking of going forward, here's the last little bit on temperatures I want to cover in the near term. 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. This parks us out there day 5 through 10, which is the 20th through the 25th. Now we see what that split flow is doing, right? Cloud cover, keeping it cool here. Northwest flow, keeping it cool there. When does that start to break up? Getting out here, day 10 through 15, we start to see some evidence of a shift in this. And that's what I'm going to be watching for. All right, just before I recorded this, we got new long-range data from the ECMWF. And if you remember, this was about 15 minutes ago, I told you that the model was initialized dry. The previous run opened this corridor up to quite a bit of wet weather, from Alberta all the way through the upper Midwest, the Western Plains, into, back into Montana, and then straight down here across these. That was a big wet corridor showing up. The newest run dried it all out. Same time period, this is what we get the difference in. And I just don't buy it. I think the model is suffering from initialization bias, and so you end up looking at this corridor going, wow, it is going to be so dry. It's not that much drier than normal, but it's giving the impression that it's going to be dry, and I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're actually going to transition into more summer pattern, meaning that northwest flow could help with more thunderstorm generation through the month of June. So I'm not overly concerned about this just yet, but all the models have bit into it. This is the newest updates from the CFSV2, and we've already looked at week 1, week 2, but look at week 3, week 4. It too trended drier in this area. It's much wetter here, but it trended drier for May 29th through June 4th, and it still has it going into the second week of June. So I'm just going to tell you, I bet they show something different by the time we get to this Thursday and get new updates, and then again next Monday. I think the model has not been able to latch on to a strong enough signal to break away from persistence, which means what it's initialized with, it just kind of keeps going. All right. From here, I want to tell you about something that I think is most key in watching. If you remember at the beginning of this, I was talking a bit about Alaska and where the ridge is with proximity to Alaska, where the troughs are in proximity to Alaska. And one of the things I'm noticing is that by the end of May, we're seeing above normal pressures over the Aleutian Islands. And what's important about watching this evolve is that should this be something that keeps recurring, now this is a big if, but should this be something that keeps recurring in, June and July and August, this is a signal that suggests the jet stream will want to do something a bit more like this. And if it comes across North America like this tends to stress the west with hotter and drier conditions up into the Canadian Prairie, at least the western Canadian Prairie, and then northwest flow in the midsection of the country, which tends to promote a lot of thunderstorms and prevent a lot of heat. What is most interesting about this is that we've been discussing for a while that we have a negative PDO signal, right? If we had a strong, dominant negative PDO signal, this high pressure, this anomalously high pressure, would be here. It'd be here, covering this whole area. And then what the jet stream would do is pop over the top of it and then dive into the west and bump up in the Midwest, meaning that the west would see cooler conditions and the Midwest would see the stress from heat and drought developing. This right here, I know it doesn't even look like much, but that pressure anomaly could be key to understanding how we are getting away from the scare of the PDO still being here and really starting to focus on El Niño. My colleague Matt Reardon pointed out just before I recorded this, right now in Niño region 3.4, we have surpassed the 0.5 degrees C above average threshold, which means if we continue down this route, we're going to have an early declaration of El Niño. But you could make an argument right now, given that we've got these westerly wind bursts coming out of this area, that we're already behaving like an El Niño. So with all of that, I'd like to show you what's changed. Warmer here, and I expect it to continue to get warmer. This is the last week of temperature change. I expect this to continue to get warmer with time. What is also interesting is that the large tropical cyclone, I believe it's pronounced Mocha, that went into parts of Bangladesh and Myanmar, did leave a pretty sizable cold water trail that is important to just kind of keep an eye on. And with these transitions, El Niño dominating and the fading of the PDO, what we'll then turn our attention to is what does the El Niño do to the weather pattern and how does it work with the Bermuda High? And the newest of the 3 big model updates we wait for at the beginning of the month came out. It's from the IRI Multi-Model Forecast Group. I want to give you the global perspective first. So this is what the models are suggesting when the Columbia University group goes through and statistically corrects for known biases. They have much of Indonesia, drier. They've got much of Australia, drier. They've got pockets of India, drier. This is for June, July, and August. Right now, the Manchurian Plain and the North China Plain, so here's the North China Plain, the Manchurian Plain is here. They're actually picking up on a bit of a wetter signal. No stresses right now in terms of precip being picked up by the model over Ukraine or this part of Russia. And we can see that in the Sahel, it's forecast to be wetter. This is important to watch because if we get early convection here, it will then be up to the El Niño to squash that convection in the main development region to see if this produces hurricanes. The Amazon is drier, but notice North America, let's zoom in on here, North America, we do not see strong signals other than the one we've been worried about, the weaker southwest monsoon. So this is just another indication that the models are not right now latching onto major drought stresses, redeveloping or developing further in the midsection of the country. Let's go out there to July, August, September. We see that the models are trying to keep this region with a risk of being drier. And if we go over to the temperature discussion, that's also where they're anchoring the greatest heat. So parts of the Four Corner states moving toward the northwest. So I just needed to add that bit into the narrative and make sure that we just continue to watch it as we go forward. So I appreciate your extra attention tonight. Just continue to gain perspective as we go forward. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again tomorrow morning. Thanks.